Ambassador Lyra Vance had seen many strange things during her 12 years serving Earth's unified stellar coalition. But the derelict station floating at the edge of known space was something different entirely. Something that made the hair on her arms stand up and her heart beat faster than it should. The station was old. Older than anything humanity had ever discovered. And it hung in the darkness like a forgotten tomb, waiting to share its secrets with anyone brave enough or foolish enough to enter. "Commander, are you sure about this?" asked Lieutenant Chun from the bridge of their ship. His voice crackling through the communication device in her helmet. Lyra did not answer right away because she was too busy staring at the symbols carved into the station's hull. Symbols that looked almost like writing, but in no language any human had ever seen. She pushed herself forward through the zero-gravity environment, her magnetic boots clicking against the ancient metal as she made her way deeper into the structure. Air inside was stale but breathable, which meant someone had wanted this place to be found eventually. Someone had wanted visitors to come here and discover whatever waited inside. Lyra found the main control room after 20 minutes of searching through empty corridors and abandoned chambers. And what she saw there made her stop breathing for several seconds. A console sat in the center of the room, still glowing with soft blue light after what must have been thousands or perhaps millions of years. And on its surface was a single blinking indicator that seemed to be waiting for her. Touch, she reached out her hand and pressed the indicator. And the room came alive with holographic displays that filled the air around her with streams of data and images and sounds. Most of it was incomprehensible, written in that same strange language she had seen on the hull. But her suit's computer began working on translation immediately, and within minutes she started to understand fragments of what she was. Seeing the words "Seedling Directive" appeared again, and the data streams, always connected to coordinates and dates and references to something called Sol 3, which Lyra recognized immediately as Earth's official astronomical designation. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through more of the data, finding records that went back over 200,000 years. Records that showed detailed observations of Earth and its inhabitants. Records that proved someone had been watching humanity since before humans had even learned to build permanent shelters. "This is impossible," she whispered to herself. But the evidence was right there in front of her eyes. Undeniable and terrifying, she downloaded everything she could onto her portable storage device, knowing that this discovery would change everything humanity believed about its place in the universe. When she returned to her ship, Lieutenant Chun could see something was wrong from the look on her face, but she refused to tell him anything until they were safely back at Coalition headquarters. The journey home took 3 weeks. And during that time, Lyra studied the data she had recovered, learning more disturbing truths with each passing day. Someone or something had been guiding humanity's development for longer than civilization had existed, making small changes here and there, pushing the species in certain directions, ensuring that humans developed in a very specific way. But why would anyone do this? And what was the purpose behind such a massive undertaking that spanned hundreds of thousands of years? Lyra could not find the answer in the data she had collected, but she did find coordinates to another location, a place that the records described as the Chamber of Origins, hidden inside the core of a neutron star at the center of the galaxy. Such a location should be impossible to reach or even survive. Yet the records suggested it was real, and that it held the answers to all her questions. When her ship finally arrived at Earth, Lyra went straight to High Command with her discovery, expecting shock and amazement and immediate action. But what she received instead was silence. Admiral Morrison stared at her for a long time after she finished her report, his face completely unreadable, and then he simply stood up and left the room without saying a single word. Within 2 hours, Lyra's security clearance was revoked, and she received orders transferring her to a remote mining outpost in the outer system. Effective immediately, she tried to contact her superiors, her colleagues, anyone who might listen to her story. But every call went unanswered, and every message was ignored. Someone high up in the coalition knew about the data she had found, and they wanted to make sure she could never share it with anyone else on the night before her scheduled departure. Lyra sat alone in her quarters, feeling defeated and confused and angry at a system she had served faithfully for over a decade. A soft chime from her door broke through her dark thoughts, and when she opened it, she found no one there. Just a small data chip lying on the floor with a note attached. The note contained only a few words. Hangar Bay 7. Dock 12. Ship is fueled and coordinates are locked. They are afraid you will learn what we really are. Lyra stared at the note for a long time, knowing that following these instructions would end her career and possibly her freedom. Knowing that she would be branded a traitor and hunted across the galaxy. But she also knew that she could not simply walk away from the truth. Could not pretend she had never seen what she had seen. Could not live the rest of her life wondering what humanity's true purpose really was. She packed a small bag with essential supplies, put on civilian clothes to avoid attention, and made her way through the quiet corridors of the station toward Hangar Bay 7. The ship waiting for her at Dock 12 was small but fast, clearly designed for long-distance travel. And when she climbed aboard and checked the navigation system, she saw that the coordinates were already programmed, and they led to a point in space that her map showed as completely empty. But Lyra knew better now. Knew that the universe held secrets that most humans would never be allowed to discover. She strapped herself into the pilot's seat, took a deep breath to steady her nerves, and activated the faster-than-light drive. The stars stretched into lines around her as the ship jumped into hyperspace, carrying her toward a destiny she could not yet imagine, toward answers that would shake the foundations of everything humanity believed about itself. As Earth disappeared behind her, Lyra Vance made a silent promise to herself that no matter what she found at those coordinates, no matter how dangerous or frightening the truth might be, she would make sure that humanity learned the truth about its place in the universe. She had no way of knowing that the truth was far stranger and far more important than anything she could have possibly imagined. That the fate of not just humanity, but all life in the galaxy, rested on what she was about to discover. The ship flew on through the darkness between stars, carrying its single passenger toward a meeting that had been millions of years in the making, toward a hidden council that had been watching and waiting for this exact moment. Ambassador Lyra Vance was about to learn why humanity existed, and the answer would change everything forever. The journey through hyperspace lasted 17 days, and during that time Lyra experienced moments of doubt so powerful that she almost turned the ship around more than once. What was she doing out here alone in the darkness, chasing after secrets that powerful people clearly wanted to stay buried, risking everything she had worked so hard to build? But each time she considered going back, she remembered the data she had found on that ancient station, remembered the proof that humanity had been watched and guided for over 200,000 years. And her resolve hardened again. Someone had created her species for a reason, and she needed to know what that reason was. When the ship finally dropped out of hyperspace at the program coordinates, Lyra found herself staring at empty space. Just darkness and distant stars, and absolutely nothing else. "No," she whispered, feeling her heart sink as she checked the navigation system again and again, confirming that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Had it all been a trick? A way to get rid of her by sending her to the middle of nowhere to die alone? She was about to activate the communication system and call for help when a voice suddenly filled her ship, speaking in a language she did not recognize at first, but that somehow translated itself inside her mind. "You have arrived at the threshold. Child of soul, now you must choose whether to see what lies beyond." Lyra spun around in her seat, looking for the source of the voice, but she was still alone in the small cockpit. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking despite her efforts to sound calm and strong. "We are the ones who planted the seeds," the voice replied. "We are the gardeners of civilization, the architects of destiny, the watchers at the edge of forever. And we have been waiting for you for a very long time." Before Lyra could respond, space itself seemed to fold around her ship, twisting and bending in ways that should have been impossible. And suddenly she was somewhere else entirely. The view outside her window had changed from empty darkness to a vast chamber filled with light and color and shapes that her human brain struggled to understand. Her ship was floating in the center of a massive structure that seemed to exist in its own pocket of reality, a place that felt both ancient and timeless, both real and impossible. "Welcome to the Chamber of Origins," the voice said. "Please exit your vessel and join us in the Hall of Gathering." Lyra's hands were shaking as she unsealed the cockpit and stepped out onto a platform that appeared beneath her feet as if it had always been there waiting. For her, the air was warm and smelled faintly of flowers she did not recognize, and the gravity felt slightly lighter than Earth standard, making each step feel like she might float away at any moment. She followed a path of glowing lights through corridors made of what looked like living crystal, walls that pulsed with soft colors and seemed to breathe around her as she passed. Finally, she entered a circular chamber, so large that she could not see the far walls. A space filled with 12 towering figures arranged in a ring around a central platform. These were not creatures like anything Lyra had ever seen or imagined. Not the little gray aliens from old Earth movies, or the humanoid species humanity had encountered since leaving its home. Planet One appeared to be made entirely of geometric light, constantly shifting and reforming into new patterns that hurt her eyes if she stared too long. Another was a massive crystalline structure that sang, with a voice like wind chimes whenever it moved. A third looked like a cloud of golden particles that swirled together into vaguely recognizable shapes before dispersing and reforming. Again, these were the progenitors, the ancient ones, being so old that they had watched stars be born and die, civilizations rise and fall, entire galaxies form and dissolve into dust. Lyra felt very small and very young standing before them, a child facing beings that had existed for billions of years. "Do not be afraid," said the geometric light being. And somehow Lyra knew this was the High Arbiter, the leader of this impossible council. "I am not afraid," Lyra said, though her voice came out barely louder than a whisper. "I am here for the truth." A sound rippled through the chamber that might have been laughter or might have been surprise, the emotional responses of beings too different from humans to interpret easily. "Truth is a heavy burden," the High Arbiter replied. "Most species that learn what we know cannot carry that weight. They break beneath it and fall into despair. Are you certain you want to receive what you have come here to find?" Lyra straightened her back and lifted her chin, refusing to show weakness, even though she was terrified down to her bones. "I need to know why humanity exists," she said. "I need to know what you did to us and why you have been watching us for so long." The High Arbiter pulsed with brighter light for a moment, and Lyra sensed that she had passed some kind of test. "Very well, child of soul. Let us tell you the truth about the Galactic Council and about the role your species was designed to play." What Lyra learned over the next several hours shattered everything she thought she knew about the universe. The Galactic Council that humanity had joined 2 centuries ago, the great assembly of spacefaring civilizations that supposedly governed the galaxy, was nothing but a show, a distraction, a puppet government created to keep younger species busy while the real power remained hidden for 3 billion years. The progenitors had guided the development of life across the galaxy, choosing which species would rise and which would fall, shaping the course of evolution on millions of worlds. creating civilizations and destroying them according to plans that spanned eons. Over 9,000 spacefaring civilizations had come before humanity, and all of them had been watched and guided and eventually judged by this hidden council. But why? Lyra asked, why would you do all of this? What purpose could possibly be worth billions of years of work? The progenitors fell silent for a long moment, communicating with each other in ways Lyra could not perceive. Every few million years, the High Arbiter finally explained, we create what we call a keystone species, a civilization designed with very specific traits to serve a critical purpose. Most keystones fail and are forgotten, but a few survive long enough to learn what they were made for. Lyra felt cold despite the warm air of the chamber. And humanity is one of these keystones? Humanity is the first keystone to survive long enough to stand in this chamber, the High Arbiter replied. You are the first to learn the truth, while your species is still young enough to do something with that knowledge. But what are we supposed to do? Lyra demanded, what purpose were we created for? The High Arbiter's geometric form shifted and swirled, expressing an emotion that Lyra interpreted as reluctance. That question is not yet for you to know, the ancient being said. We must first convene a tribunal to decide whether humanity is worthy of learning its true purpose, whether your species can be trusted with the burden we designed you to carry. A tribunal? Lyra felt anger rising in her chest. You created us. You watched us for 200,000 years, and now you want to put us on trial. Yes, the High Arbiter said simply. And you, Ambassador Lyra Vance of Earth, will stand as humanity's representative. The fate of your entire species will rest on your shoulders. The weight of those words pressed down on Lyra like a physical force. But she did not back down, did not look away from the ancient beings surrounding her. Then let the tribunal begin, she said. I am ready to speak for humanity. The progenitors began to glow brighter, and Lyra knew that the most important moment in human history was about to unfold, with her standing alone at its center. The tribunal began without ceremony or warning, and Lyra found herself standing on a raised platform in the center of the chamber, while 12 ancient beings looked down at her with eyes that had witnessed the birth and death of countless civilizations. This conclave has not gathered to judge a keystone species in 900 million years, the High Arbiter announced. Today we will examine humanity and determine whether they are worthy of learning their purpose or whether they should be terminated as a failed experiment. The word terminated hit Lyra like a physical blow, and she suddenly understood that this was not just about learning the truth. This was about survival, about the future of every human being who had ever lived or ever would live. Let us begin with the evidence, said a progenitor who appeared as a swirling mass of dark energy. Let us show this representative what her species truly is. The air around Lyra filled with holographic images, and what she saw made her stomach turn with shame, and horror wars stretched across the display. Thousands of years of human conflict, from ancient battles fought with swords and spears to modern wars that scarred entire planets. Millions upon millions of deaths caused by nothing more than greed and hatred and fear. She watched humans enslave other humans, treating their own kind as property to be bought and sold and worked to death. She saw environmental destruction on a massive scale. Forests burned, oceans poisoned, species driven to extinction because humans could not control their hunger for resources. There were images of genocide and torture and cruelty that made Lyra want to look away. But she forced herself to watch, forced herself to witness everything that her species had done wrong. This is what humanity is, the dark energy progenitor declared. A species that cannot stop destroying itself and everything around it. A failed experiment that should have been ended long ago. Several other progenitors made sounds of agreement, and Lyra felt despair creeping into her heart. How could she possibly defend humanity against such overwhelming evidence of failure and evil? The subject will now speak, the High Arbiter said. Defend your species if you can. Lyra stood in silence for a long moment, gathering her thoughts, knowing that whatever she said next would determine the fate of 8 billion people. I will not deny what you have shown me, she finally said, her voice steady despite her fear. Everything you displayed is true. Humanity has done terrible things throughout its history. The progenitors stirred with what might have been surprise, clearly expecting her to make excuses or try to minimize human failures. But you have shown only part of the story. Lyra continued. You have shown our darkness without showing our light, our failures without showing our triumphs. She stepped forward on the platform, her confidence growing as she spoke. Yes, we have fought wars, terrible wars that killed millions. But after each war, we built peace. We created treaties and organizations dedicated to preventing future conflicts. We learned from our mistakes, even when learning was painful. The holographic display around her shifted, now showing images that Lyra was controlling through sheer force of will. Images drawn from the same data the progenitors had used, but telling a different story. You showed us enslaving each other, but you did not show us fighting to end slavery. You did not show the humans who risked everything to free others, who gave their lives for the principle that all people deserve to be free. Images of abolitionists and freedom fighters filled the air. Ordinary humans who had stood against injustice, even when it cost them everything. You showed us destroying our environment, but you did not show us learning to protect it. You did not show the scientists and activists who dedicated their lives to healing the damage we caused, who developed technologies to clean our air and water and restore our damaged ecosystems. The display showed reforestation projects and clean energy initiatives and species brought back from the edge of extinction through human effort and care. You call us a failed experiment, Lyra said, her voice rising with passion. But a failed experiment does not improve. A failed experiment does not learn. A failed experiment does not choose to become better. She looked directly at the dark energy progenitor who had presented the evidence against humanity. Every generation of humans has had to choose what kind of species we want to be. And every generation has had individuals who chose darkness. But every generation has also had individuals who chose light, who fought for justice and compassion and progress. The youngest progenitor, a being called Witness Orth, who appeared as a flowing river of silver liquid, spoke for the first time. The representative makes an interesting argument. She does not deny human failures, but reframes them as part of a process of growth. Growth that takes too long, another progenitor countered. Other keystone species showed promise early and then fell apart. What makes humanity different? Lyra took a deep breath and spoke the words that had been forming in her mind throughout this entire ordeal. We are different because we know what we are, she said. We are aware of our own capacity for evil, and we struggle against it every single day, not because we are naturally good, but because we choose to be good even though being evil would be easier. She turned slowly, addressing all 12 progenitors. You have watched us for 200,000 years. You have seen our worst moments, but have you truly understood what you were seeing? The chamber fell silent, and Lyra continued. When a human does something good, it is not because they lack the ability to do evil. It is because they looked at the darkness inside themselves and said no. Every act of human kindness is a victory over our own nature. Every moment of compassion is a choice made freely. Witness. Arth flowed and swirled with increased agitation. I have studied humanity for millennia, the young progenitor said. And I believe the representative speaks truth. Every species we have deemed worthy was forged in fire, was shaped by suffering into something stronger. But the humans are different. The other progenitors turned their attention to Orth. Different how? The High Arbiter asked. Other species were shaped by external forces, by environment or evolution, or our own subtle guidance, Arth explained. But humans shape themselves. They look at what they are and decide to become something else. They forge themselves over and over again. By choice. A ripple of energy passed through the chamber as the progenitors communicated with each other in ways too complex for Lyra to perceive. That has never happened before, Orth concluded. In 3 billion years of watching civilizations rise and fall, we have never seen a species that recreates itself with each generation, that refuses to accept what it is and insists on becoming what it wishes to be. The dark energy progenitor made a sound of disagreement. Words do not change facts. Humanity remains violent and destructive and short-sighted. Potential means nothing if it is never realized. But they are realizing it, Arth argued. Slowly, imperfectly, with many setbacks. But the trajectory is clear. Humanity is becoming more peaceful, more cooperative, more compassionate with each passing century. The debate continued for hours, with progenitors arguing on both sides. Some calling for humanity's termination, and others defending the species' right to continue. Lyra stood silent through most of it, having said everything she could say. Knowing that the decision was now out of her hands, finally, the High Arbiter called for a vote. And Lyra watched as each progenitor cast their judgment when the voting was complete. The result was something that had not happened in the entire history of the conclave at Tai. 6 in favor of humanity continuing, and 6 in favor of termination. We cannot reach consensus, the High Arbiter announced. For the first time in 900 million years. We are divided. Lyra felt hope and fear in equal measure. Not knowing what would happen next, there is only one way to break this impasse, the High Arbiter said. We must reveal humanity's true purpose and allow the representative to decide whether her species should bear that burden. The other progenitors made sounds of shock and concern, but none of them objected. Lyra's heart pounded as she realized she was about to learn the secret that had been hidden for billions of years. The reason humanity had been created, the purpose that would determine the fate of her entire species. Prepare yourself. Child of soul, the High Arbiter said. What you are about to learn will change everything you believe about the universe and about humanity's place within it. The High Arbiter's geometric form expanded until it filled the entire ceiling of the chamber, and Lyra felt a pressure building in her mind as the ancient being prepared to share knowledge that had been guarded for billions of years. What I am about to show you is the greatest secret in the universe, the High Arbiter said. Only the 12 progenitors have known this truth, and now you will become the 13th being to carry this burden. The holographic display changed, showing a map of the observable universe. Billions of galaxies spreading across the void in patterns too beautiful and too vast for any human mind to fully comprehend. 3 billion years ago, we were young, not as young as your species, but young enough to believe we understood everything, the High Arbiter began. We had conquered death and mastered energy and learned to travel between galaxies in the blink of an eye. The display zoomed outward, showing the edge of the observable universe, the boundary beyond which light had not yet had time to reach. Then we discovered the hollow. A new image appeared, and Lyra felt her blood turn to ice as she looked at it. It was not a thing, not an object or a creature or a phenomenon that could be described with ordinary words. It was an absence, a place where reality simply stopped existing, a wound in the fabric of existence itself that spread outward like a stain on the universe. The hollow is not a black hole, the High Arbiter explained. Black holes are part of the universe. They follow rules. They can be understood. But the hollow follows no rules because it is not part of anything. Lyra watched in horror as the display showed the hollow spreading, slowly but inevitably consuming stars and planets and entire galaxies, leaving nothing behind. Not even empty space. It is the opposite of existence. The High Arbiter continued. Wherever it touches, reality unravels. Matter and energy, and even the fabric of space-time itself, simply cease to be. How fast is it spreading? Lyra asked, her voice barely a whisper, slowly by cosmic standards. But fast enough that it will reach the edge of your galaxy in approximately 11 million years. And in 50 million years, nothing will remain. The weight of those words crushed down on Lyra like a physical force, and she had to steady herself against the platform to keep from falling. The entire universe is dying, she said, and there is nothing anyone can do to stop it. We have tried everything, the High Arbiter replied. And for the first time, Lyra heard something like emotion in the ancient being's voice. Something like despair. We threw our greatest weapons at the Hollow, energies that could destroy entire star systems. And they simply disappeared. We sent our greatest minds to study it. And they returned mad or did not return at all. We tried to communicate with it, to reason with it, to understand it. But there is nothing there to communicate with. The other progenitors had fallen silent, their forms dimming as if the memory of their failures still caused them pain. We are the most advanced beings in the universe, the High Arbiter said. We have existed for billions of years and accumulated knowledge that your species cannot even imagine. And we have found no solution. Lyra's mind raced as she tried to process what she was hearing. But what does this have to do with humanity? She asked, what does this have to do with Keystone species? The High Arbiter's form contracted and intensified, focusing on Lyra with what felt like desperate attention. When we realized we could not defeat the Hollow ourselves, we began searching for alternatives. We studied every aspect of our own minds, trying to understand why we could not find a solution. And we discovered something disturbing. What did you discover? We discovered that we are too logical, the High Arbiter said. Too rational. Too bound by evidence and probability and realistic assessment. When we look at the Hollow, we see an unsolvable problem. And our minds simply accept that conclusion. The display changed again, showing a timeline of all the Keystone species that had been created over the past 3 billion years. So we began creating species designed with traits we ourselves lack. Species engineered to approach problems in ways we cannot. The first Keystones were designed for pure mathematical thinking, believing that perhaps the solution required calculations beyond even our capabilities. Lyra watched as the timeline showed species after. Species being created and then marked as failures. Mathematical species concluded that the Hollow could not be stopped and chose collective suicide rather than face a meaningless future. So we tried species designed for spiritual thinking, believing that perhaps faith could succeed where logic failed. More failures appeared on the timeline. The spiritual species became obsessed with the Hollow, worshipping it as a god, welcoming annihilation as divine judgment. We tried species designed for perfect unity, believing that perhaps a single mind spanning an entire civilization could find solutions that individuals could not. Let me guess, Lyra said bitterly. They failed too. They fell into despair when they realized they were a single mind trapped in a dying universe with no hope of salvation. The timeline continued, showing thousands of failed Keystones. Thousands of species created and destroyed in a desperate search for something that could stand against the end of everything. Then we created humanity, the High Arbiter said. And you were different from the beginning. Different how? We designed you with something that no other Keystone possessed. Something that we progenitors lack entirely. Something that we did not even have a word for until we watched your species develop. The High Arbiter paused, and all 12 progenitors focused their attention on Lyra. We designed you with irrational hope, Lyra blinked in confusion. Hope is irrational? She asked. For us, yes, the High Arbiter replied. Hope implies believing in positive outcomes without sufficient evidence. Continuing to strive when logic says striving is pointless. Finding meaning struggle, even when that struggle cannot succeed. The display showed images of humans throughout history. Not the wars and atrocities from before, but something different: soldiers charging into impossible battles. Doctors fighting diseases that had no cure. Scientists pursuing theories that everyone said were wrong. Ordinary people getting up each morning to face lives filled with hardship and pain. We watched humans charge into certain death and somehow survive. The High Arbiter said, we watched humans solve problems by refusing to accept that problems were unsolvable. We watched humans find joy and meaning and purpose in a universe that offers none of those things. Objectively, Witness Orith spoke up. The silver liquid progenitor flowing with agitation. I have studied humans who knew they were dying, who had no logical reason to hope for anything, and yet they continued to hope anyway. They planned for futures they would never see. They worked on projects they would never complete. They loved people they would have to leave behind. We cannot comprehend this, the High Arbiter admitted. When we face impossible odds, we accept defeat and conserve our resources. But humans do not accept defeat, even when defeat is mathematically certain. Lyra felt something stirring in her chest. A mix of pride and understanding, and a strange kind of recognition. You did not create us to defeat the Hollow, she said slowly. You created us to try when trying makes no sense. Yes, the High Arbiter confirmed. We have no evidence that you will succeed. We have no logical reason to believe that humanity can accomplish what 9,000 civilizations and 12 progenitor races have failed to achieve. But you do not require logic. You do not require evidence. You do not require reason. The ancient being's form pulsed with something that might have been emotion. That is what makes you terrifying. Child of soul, that is what makes you our last hope. You are capable of believing in victory against impossible odds. You are capable of fighting when fighting serves no purpose. You are capable of finding meaning in struggle itself. Lyra stood in silence as the truth settled into her mind. Humanity had been created to face the end of the universe. Not because they had any chance of winning, but because they were the only species stubborn enough to try anyway. And now you must choose, the High Arbiter said. Should humanity be told the truth? Should they be given the burden of saving a universe that created them as tools? Should they spend their remaining millions of years struggling against something that cannot be stopped? The question hung in the air, heavier than anything Lyra had ever felt. The fate of her entire species rested on what she decided next. Lyra stood alone on the platform, the weight of the universe pressing down on her shoulders as 12 ancient beings waited for her. Answers she thought about everything she had learned. About the hollow consuming reality at the edge of existence. About the billions of years the progenitors had spent searching for a solution. About the 9,000 civilizations that had been created and destroyed in that desperate search. She thought about humanity. About all the people back on Earth who had no idea that their entire existence had been engineered. That their capacity for hope and stubbornness and irrational optimism was not an accident but a deliberate design, she thought. About her parents who had worked hard their entire lives to give her opportunities they never had. About her friends who had supported her through every difficult moment. About the strangers she had met throughout her career who had shown her kindness for no reason other than basic human decency, and she thought about what it meant to be human. To wake up every morning in a universe that promised nothing, and yet to still find reasons to keep going. To still find meaning and purpose and joy in the face of inevitable death. You made us to fight the unbeatable enemy, she finally said, her voice steady and clear. But you misunderstand what you created. The progenitors stirred with interest. their ancient forms leaning toward her as she spoke. We do not fight because we were designed to fight. We fight because that is who we chose to become. Every single generation, we make that choice again. You may have given us the spark, but we built the fire ourselves. The High Arbiter's geometric form pulsed with what might have been curiosity. You speak as though humanity is something separate from what we created. But you are the product of our engineering. Your very capacity for hope exists because we placed it there. No, Lyra said. Shaking her head, you gave us the potential for hope. But potential means nothing without choice. Every human who has ever hoped for something better could have chosen despair instead. Every act of courage could have been replaced by surrender. Every moment of kindness could have been selfishness. She stepped forward, her confidence growing with each word. You created a species capable of irrational hope. But you did not create a species that would automatically exercise that capability. We had to choose to hope. We had to decide that hope was worth the pain of disappointment. We had to build cultures and traditions and stories that taught each new generation that hoping was better than giving up. The chamber fell silent as the progenitors processed her words. You want to know if humanity should be given this burden. Lyra continued. You want me to decide whether my species should spend its existence fighting against the end of everything. She paused. Looking at each progenitor in turn, I accept the burden. But I have conditions. A ripple of surprise passed through the chamber, and several progenitors made sounds of what might have been amusement or disbelief. Conditions? The High Arbiter asked. You stand before beings that have existed for billions of years. Beings that created your entire species, and you presume to set conditions? Yes, Lyra said simply, because that is what humans do. She stood straighter, her chin lifted in defiance. First, there will be full disclosure to Earth. No more secrets, no more watching from the shadows. Humanity deserves to know the truth about its origins and its purpose. And if the truth causes your species to fall into despair like so many others, a progenitor asked, then we will deal with that together, Lyra replied. But I will not allow my people to be manipulated any longer. We have a right to know what we are facing and to choose how we respond. What else? The High Arbiter asked, and Lyra sensed genuine interest beneath the question. Second, there will be full partnership with the progenitors. You have tried to solve this problem alone for 3 billion years, and you have failed. Perhaps it is time to try a different approach. Perhaps working together will reveal possibilities that neither of us could find separately. You would have us share our knowledge with a species barely 2 centuries removed from its home planet. Another progenitor asked incredulously. Yes, Lyra said. Because fresh eyes see things that experienced eyes miss. Because sometimes the answer is obvious to a child, but invisible to an expert. Because you have nothing to lose by trying. The progenitors communicated silently with each other, their forms flickering and pulsing with complex patterns of light and energy. And your third condition? The High Arbiter finally asked. Access to everything you know about the Hollow. Every observation, every experiment, every failed attempt, every piece of data you have collected over 3 billion years. We cannot fight an enemy we do not understand. And we cannot understand an enemy if you hide information from us. Lyra took a deep breath before delivering her final point. I will not let humanity be a weapon wielded by ancient hands. If we are going to face the end of everything, we will do it as partners, as equals, as allies working together toward a common goal. Not as tools to be used and discarded. The chamber fell silent for a long time. So long that Lyra began to wonder if she had gone too far. If her conditions had offended the progenitors beyond forgiveness. Then the High Arbiter did something that had never happened in 3 billion years of existence. The ancient being bowed, its geometric form folding inward in a gesture of respect that every other progenitor immediately mirrored. Your conditions are accepted. Ambassador Lyra Vance of Earth, the High Arbiter said, for the first time since our creation, we bow to a younger species, not because we must, but because we choose to. Lyra felt tears forming in her eyes. Tears of relief and pride, and something else she could not name. You have proven something today that we did not believe possible, the High Arbiter continued. You have shown us that the hope we engineered into humanity is not merely a tool, but a genuine strength. A strength that we respect and admire, even though we cannot fully understand it. Witness Orth flowed forward, the silver liquid progenitor approaching Lyra's platform. I must ask you something before you leave, Orth said. I have studied your kind for millennia, and I believe I understand you better than most of my fellow progenitors. But there is one question I cannot answer. Lyra wiped her eyes and looked at the young progenitor. What is your question? Do you truly believe humanity can succeed where 9,000 civilizations and 12 progenitor races have failed? Lyra was silent for a moment, considering the question seriously. The hollow was vast and incomprehensible. A wound in reality that had resisted every attempt to understand or stop it for billions of years. The odds against humanity were not merely astronomical. They were beyond calculation, beyond comprehension, beyond any rational assessment, and yet, no, Lyra admitted. I do not believe we can succeed. The evidence says we will fail. Logic says we have no chance. Reason says we should accept defeat and make peace with the end. She smiled. A small and tired and somehow unbroken smile. But I believe we will try anyway, and honestly, that has kept us alive this long. Orth made a sound that might have been laughter. You understand that your answer makes no logical sense? I understand, Lyra replied, but humans have never been particularly good at logic. We are better at stubbornness. The progenitors began preparing her ship for departure, loading it with data crystals containing more information than humanity had accumulated in its entire existence. As Lyra climbed back into the cockpit, she took one last look at the Chamber of Origins, at the 12 ancient beings who had watched over the galaxy for longer than time had meaning. We will contact Earth within 1 standard year, the High Arbiter said. Prepare your people for the truth. Prepare them for partnership. Prepare them for the greatest challenge any species has ever faced. I will. Lyra promised. The ship lifted off from the platform, and space folded around it once again, returning her to normal reality, to the familiar darkness between stars as she set course for Earth. Lyra thought about all the people who would need to be told, all the fear and confusion and doubt that would follow the revelation, but she also thought about what would come after, about scientists and engineers and artists and ordinary people all working together on the greatest project in the history of existence. She thought about the first human ships traveling to study the hollow, about the first human minds wrestling with a problem that had defeated billions before them. She thought about failure, because failure was certain, at least at first, but she also thought about trying again after failure, and again after that, and again after that, because giving up was simply not something humans were good at. The progenitors watched her ship disappear into hyperspace, carrying the fate of existence back to a small blue world that had only learned to leave its atmosphere 2 centuries ago. Do you believe they can succeed? One progenitor asked the High Arbiter. The ancient being was silent for a long moment. I do not know, it finally admitted. But for the first time in 3 billion years, I'd find myself hoping. Another progenitor made a sound of surprise. You are feeling hope, an emotion you have always said we were incapable of experiencing. The High Arbiter's geometric form shifted and swirled, expressing something new, something that had not existed in its consciousness before this day. Perhaps the humans are already changing us, it said. Perhaps that is the first step toward finding a solution. Learning to hope even when hope makes no sense.